1, 2, 3, 4.
It was intended for the human to support the machine to support the human.
And AI means something different to anybody you talk to, which is wild.
This is AI or Die.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 24 of AI or Die. It is summertime. The sun's out. It's beautiful. As usual, we have your hosts, Nick Wu, Rehgan Bleile, Brendan Kelly on the call. Hey, everybody. How we doing?
Doing great. So
Good.
glad it warmed up.
Good to see you
Love
guys.
kicking off with some weather.
Yes, let's talk about the weather. Today's episode is going to be a bit different. We're going to do another Q&A episode. We've gotten a lot of questions called in from callers. So we've basically organized those all up, and we're going to go through some questions that they're asking, just based off of what they're seeing in their own organizations and just some thought-provoking stuff that we can talk through. Per usual, we're going to open up with a warm-up, where we're at, what we're doing, what's going on to Align AI, what we're seeing with our customers and industry. We'll get into some news and trends as well, just what's been happening in the past month or so. And then we'll end today's episode with that audience Q&A. So first and foremost, what's up? What's new? Brendan, how you doing, man? How's life?
I'm doing good. It's just summer in Spain, so we're going to the beach, hanging out. It's very good. I shaved my beard down for the first time in a very long time yesterday. I've gotten a single comment about it, so that's been jarring for me personally. But I think
It shocked me today.
About 5 years younger is what I was going for. So
I don't see a difference.
I definitely do.
Yeah. Okay.
I think I look like a small child. That's what I look like to myself. I know it's not 100%, but so that's exciting. I haven't seen my cheeks in a while, so that's good. It's a big development in my personal life. But yeah, other than that, just like hanging out in Spain. We have a new apartment that we're moving into, so down by the water. It's very nice. Get to watch the sailboats going through the ocean. So it's very cool.
It's pretty sweet. I'd call it ocean view, because I was on a call with you earlier to give me a little view of the porch. You can see the blue water. It's nice.
It's very relaxing. It's like having like a painting that like slowly moves, so you can just like sit out there and just chill and watch the ocean. It's very nice. It's very
living screensaver. Yeah.
Basically.
This is, for folks watching on video, I still have the mustache. It is my first summer with a mustache, and I'm starting to feel what you're feeling, Brendan, just around the weight of having facial hair in the summertime. It hits different compared to the spring and fall. So we'll see if I keep it going or not. What is
new? Because like it's not good for the sun, right? Because like a beard is nice because you don't get burned on your face as much, but a mustache, like the nose is already covering that part, so you're already good. I guess like less SPF lip balm for you. You know, you're saving money long term, right?
If I wait too long, will I get a tan line? So then will I have an opposite?
You should have
a mustache on my upper lip.
That's great.
Very
shadow mustache.
Yeah, listeners.
I went full mom chop.
Oh yeah, you got a haircut as well too.
Yes, I chopped a bunch of hair off for the summer as well. So.
Dang, the video version listeners of our podcast are in for a treat today. We all have a slightly different look. So if you're listening on audio, pop over to the video side and see what's up. Also, things that are going on, just what we're seeing. I think it's fascinating. I've seen a lot of enterprises start to pivot from Microsoft Copilot to more ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Just as they've gotten their hands on both. Obviously, Copilot wins when we're talking about working inside of Office apps, but they're finding that such a narrow value prop compared to everything that ChatGPT can do. And just the strides that even traditional enterprises are making in enabling folks to create their own GPTs. And it's kind of like baby steps into how they're starting to think about agentic and the ability to connect different GPTs for very narrow uses in that way too.
You were just on site with a bunch of executives as well. What was the general sentiment? It's, one of our customers had their CEO and a bunch of executives. So at a high level, was there a general sentiment towards that?
Yeah. So for listeners out there, if you guys have both or considering, doing multiple Gen AI options, because this is very much in the lane of everyday AI for these organizations, like how can we at scale enable hundreds, if not thousands of people to be going in day by day using a Gen AI tool? Initially, early on, having both felt almost overwhelming for a lot of associates of like, now we're having to clarify, what do I go to Copilot for versus what do I go to ChatGPT for? So it's starting to be that consolidation that a lot of them are saying of, let's just pick one for simplicity of enablement and rollout and communications. And let's lean into the one that is going to be one, easier for people to just get into and use, but also has a wider range of what it can provide, especially with Copilot Studio versus creating your own GPTs in ChatGPT, I think has a better UI, which it speaks volumes to just the work that OpenAI has done and just how it makes it easier for enterprises who are so entrenched in Office to still want to hop over to ChatGPT instead, which is fascinating.
Well, it's funny too, because they have a really strong, tight coupling and partnership as well. And so it'll be interesting to see if ChatGPT Enterprise really does cannibalize to an extent the Microsoft Copilot licensing. I've gotten more of an uptick in clarity around Copilot Studio, what it does, how it can be useful. There's just, I mean, the big thing that they keep harping on, Microsoft being they, is that it is fully, quote, integrated into the stack, which I understand has value. But there's more and more of a capability with a lot of these other tools, like Claude, even on the like Anthropic is doing a pretty big push on integrations for the enterprise. I know OpenAI is also doing a pretty big push on integrations as well. And the more and more they develop on the integration side, it becomes a little bit less of a fear on it being, quote, plugged in. Because if you log into Copilot Studio, you still have to, quote, integrate into those apps, right?
The new Outlook.
Exactly. And Copilot Studio specifically, like if you're building an agent or a Copilot, you have to still push it into a Teams channel or into something else. And I think the downfall of that is like, it's kind of apples to apples to a certain extent. The upside of that is the security element when you are building the integration. It's like it's already secure, it's already in the suite, right? We don't have to think about that. But the downfall is basically like, well, we can build integrations into other tools as well. It's just managing those integrations that becomes a pain.
The multi-tool choice is still ever present in that if they are going all in on ChatGPT, they still see Anthropic out there. They still see Notebook LM and very pointed uses there, helping to provide associates a menu of what's really good at specific tasks and really helping managers to help justify my associate needs this specific tool for this reason, right? So it comes back to the use case and the capabilities that they're really building as pillars inside of their organization.
Yeah.
Yeah. It also feels like you won't. OpenAI has all the features, right? They're still leading the feature game. Even Anthropic is like fast following releasing stuff. I think they're doing slightly better at a lot of that functionality. Like the deep research stuff just came out with Claude and it's very nice. It's very good. But they are lagging behind. So I think it makes sense that why everybody's kind of going OpenAI ChatGPT, because Copilot does feel limited, and then ChatGPT does seem to have like that leading kind of stance around what people are going to be using, even in the enterprise side, which I think is going to be interesting to see how that plays out further, for sure.
And especially with OpenAI bringing on Johnny Ive from a design standpoint, I'm very interested to see the leaps forward that they will take from a user experience standpoint with him and his company on board. It seems like they're going to start leaning more into the design side because they see the value of that from an enablement standpoint inside of enterprises and for personal users too.
Yeah, I think the big thing there was the hardware piece. It's like they're actually deploying a device.
Which, yeah, I'm so fascinated by that, like what that looks like, because
I'm just not convinced that I want one.
Well, the hardware market's so saturated with wearables. I know they're leaning into glasses as well as kind of that next big thing. But
I've seen several people who are just like, some of those like tech forward folks who have these pendants or these whatever, and they're just recording conversations at all times without consent, like in person, like you and I are having a discussion, like in a room alone, and this person's just recording you without you knowing. I mean, it's just, there's several instances of that happening already.
Yeah,
like
the Meta glasses.
You can do that with your phone. You can do that with other things as well. I'm not saying that you can't do that. It's just like, it's weird as a default. Like, no, thank you, in my opinion.
I remember that being a thing 8 years ago in Austin, like people walking around with the pins that were recording everything, like the second brain stuff. It's just like the privacy around that is atrocious to think about. So I don't know.
It's so bizarre.
If people are ready for that. Yeah.
Societally, I don't think anybody's ready for that. If people in the tech industry are concerned, like not ready for it, then like definitely the broader population isn't.
I do wonder, bringing it back to enterprises, how far off we are from like wearables and the everyday workflow of folks inside of an enterprise.
we can barely get voice being used in enterprise.
Recording and transcribing meetings, right, already has a ton of guardrails up, let alone a device for every corporate conversation that's happening.
Yeah. I will say from my experience, just like personally using it, because I've been like walking on the treadmill when I start my day and like talking to ChatGPT or doing stuff there to like get ready. And like, I always thought the thing that would get us away from the paradigm of like keyboard and screen would be some VR, AR kind of like, visual solution, but it might actually be AI that can actually pull us out of that paradigm to get us into a more free form kind of interaction, because just the way the interface works, you can act directly with like a database essentially. So I'm kind of curious to see like what they cook up next around how that interface works. Is it going to be all verbal? Is it going to be like some heavy agentic thing? Like I'm kind of curious to see what they come up with.
There is certainly a desire for verbal, especially among executives. Again, back to the conversations that they were having around, okay, so we have a license for ChatGPT. Can it be on my machine, my laptop, but also similar to OneDrive on my phone so I can speak to it? There is certainly that desire inside of enterprise to be able to speak to it and have that conversation to give it more rich context.
It is the number one use case I use when I do like AI 101 with executives or with anybody who is in a management level. It's like a lot of the work they do is less point and click and less workflowy, and it's more management and oversight and strategy and abstract thinking and concepts. And so it's written, it's emails, it's messages, it's decks, it's it's these very text-based, image-based type of work. And so when you think about it, a voice makes so much sense. And I give people techniques that they can use on voice with ChatGPT specifically, where it's like, interview me on these topics and make sure I'm ready for this board meeting or this conversation. Capture these like ramblings or notes that I have and put it into a structured format for me to do something with later. Like, these are all things that I know many of us in the space are super aware of, but like executives have no idea how much of an unlock that can be for them.
And agentic continues to be the topic of conversation, but at least they're talking more realistically around what are the baby steps to get there, and how do we think about our role as managers changing to be managing both humans and agents in the next 5 years, if possible there.
And another thing that we are focused on too, and not just on the executive level, but like think about the institutional knowledge problem that we've talked about for years. What happens when you're trying to go gather requirements or information from people inside of the organization who have all of this institutional knowledge in their head, but it's not documented anywhere? Well, you get on a Teams meeting and you ask questions and they share their screen and they show you stuff, and you may record it and you may take notes and you may create workflows from that. And then what? Right? We need to be able to translate this into something useful so that we can build solutions for them. Right. But it is very verbal, very conceptual, very like explanatory from that perspective. And so I think being able to capture that, like, who's going to write out those instructions?
Right.
Nobody. That's why there's no documentation in SharePoint on it, because nobody's sitting around thinking, I'm going to write out all of that, maybe besides Brendan, because he likes documentation.
Our in-house writer. Yeah.
But I'm definitely not.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see too, like the different formats of it, because if you use writing, you have the ability to kind of beat it up more. So I was just talking to like a PM at Amazon, like a product manager at Amazon, right? And they do that classic 6-pager.
Yeah.
And they have now they have their own way to whip that up, I guess, or something like that, where they can work on it with like a product requirements document, a product brief. They can have it beat it up, and like they say, it just drastically changes not only how you think and plan, but then how you also break stuff down and communicate it. So I think that's still been my biggest unlock. It might not even just be like process level documentation, but saying like, hey, here's generally where we want to go, and then let's break that down into something tangible. I think in the enterprise, that's a huge, huge opportunity, because not only do you have the ability to clearly articulate where you want to go, but then you can see who can help you get there, who's already doing the same things along those lines. I just saw a good LinkedIn post of people at a enterprise had the shared, like the same KPI that they were all planning to move up, and the total increase to that KPI was going to be 500%, which was like physically impossible. So just being able to recognize and identify who's going after the same things and how to get there faster. Like if we can use AI, long form writing together, I wonder if there'll be a lot of an improvement around just general efficiency around strategy and kind of that alignment piece.
Just pure discoverability. Yeah, even though departments sit right next to each other, a lot of times it can feel like they're miles away, just in terms of understanding what each other are working on, for sure.
I'm super interested in the inconsistency question. So, because this is where enterprises really, I mean, not only the silo problem, but the inconsistency level. Like, how interesting would it be for everyone across different departments on the very same KPI, very same goal, do long form writing, like you said, Brendan, on their interpretation, their goals, their whatever, and then have AI do an analysis on the contradictions between all of them, or the, you know, the misinterpretations of metrics or the misinterpretations of goals. Like that to me, I know we say the word align a lot. That's like the ultimate alignment. It's like, wow, sales and I really have different interpretations of those goals and how we're planning on how we're planning to get there.
Yeah.
That's where a lot of the political friction happens in enterprises too. It just, some of that can't be fixed because people are people at the end of the day, but you can at least identify that that is a problem. And that's at least helpful, I think, you know.
Nice. Let's get into the news. I'm going to start with one. Brendan, I want to pass it to you about Arizona Man. It's kind of like Florida Man, but I'll pass it to you. And then I know, Rehgan, you have a few stories as well. One top one that's just happened in the last month. I think I wonder if this is the beginning of a consolidation. Salesforce acquired Informatica, something like an $8 billion deal there. So we internally, we were kind of scratching our head on that. But I wonder if it's kind of writing on the wall just related to the consolidation of these data apps and these very, very large enterprise systems working together. So we'll see if more deals like that come about. This one's interesting, Brendan, the one that you shared, which is the Arizona Man who was shot dead in a road rage accident, kind of returns to address his killer in court. Do you want to just talk more about that for our listeners around like the scenario here?
Yeah, definitely. It's just like one of those interesting, what a strange way to use AI. But this was in a court. They showed a video that was basically recreating the victim to like talk during the sentencing hearing. And I think it actually was the family of the victim that wrote kind of the script that went to it. To actually like, it sounded like, just reading from the BBC, it was like to be more forgiving or less harsh in the sentencing, which I didn't expect. I thought it would be more like a revenge, kind of thing. But it sounds like it was actually like lighten the impression. But all that to say, it's just super weird that they would have this caricature generated by AI. It's definitely in that uncanny valley where it looks like him, but you can tell it's not a human talking. And so I just thought this was really interesting to do, period. I feel like it's a taboo thing to do, to create a representation of someone who's dead and speak on their behalf after they're dead. But then also to do that in a court, I thought was very wild, because I can see it like in a commercial or something that's more open-ended, but to do that in a court of law is pretty wild. That was one of those like, why so fast kind of moments. But I definitely did not like it. Thumbs down, big hard thumbs down on this whole concept. Yes.
It's almost like they're leaning into making it more emotional by putting a face to the testimony of the person who is deceased, which is so interesting. And you made a point earlier, Brendan, like they put the guy in a hoodie and a hat. He's not even in like a suit or anything like that as well. It's such a fascinating application of AI. I scratch my head around how appropriate it is. I see the intention in terms of trying to sway the jury in some way or another, but it is very uncanny just how it's being applied in a court of law now in Arizona.
Yeah, we'll create a new like side business that's a living will to not use your image as recreation after you die. Like we'll lock it down. It's like a DNR, but
it's reminding me of like
A&R.
Hologram Tupac at Coachella like 10 years ago. Like, how do you control that?
Well, how do you say whether or not you want your likeness being used in that way if you weren't aware of it before you
Very
died?
True.
And like, I get it's your family, so maybe he had a great relationship with his family, but not everyone does. So, that's also kind of, I don't know. It makes me very uneasy. I don't like it either.
It's a weird use of the technology. Yeah, very strange.
Yeah.
Rehgan, I know you had a couple top stories that you want to talk through as well.
Yeah. Maybe let's start with Klarna. I know everybody is following that story right? So last year, I think it was in the fall, actually, it might have been around September timeline, because I know it was kind of buzzing. Klarna had made this really big announcement that they were using AI to replace the work of 700 reps in their customer service process. It was one of those big buzzy headlines. They had also mentioned that they were getting rid of Salesforce. They were getting rid, I think, of Workday as well, because they were leveraging AI to kind of replicate the functionality of those two software systems. There was a pretty big walk back that happened in the beginning of May. So this news article is a little bit old at this point, but the CEO did walk it back a little bit, basically saying that number one, there were a decent amount of losses of this quarter compared to last quarter from Klarna, and I'm not creating an attribution of that to what they did with AI, but they were getting tons of feedback, negative feedback from the customer experience side, which again, monitoring those outcomes is super important from that perspective. But he did walk it back quite a bit, and he said, I just think it's so critical that you are clear to your customer that there will always be a human if you want. So we always talk about like human in the loop, human options. He goes on to say AI solves the easy stuff. Our experts handle the moments that matter. So, there was a lot of feedback that they got. I thought it was just an interesting overall, like when it happened, everybody said it was too good to be true.
Mhm.
And then here we are almost a year later, where they had to actually rehire tons of people on the customer service side, which I don't know why you would want to go back to a company that was so quick to slash their
Right.
customer service team. This to me is a huge red flag culturally, just to get headlines, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't know, making it seem like you're so much further along than other companies and you're leveraging of AI, and then having to come out publicly and say, just kidding. Like it ended up not working out the way that we thought it would. But again, that took them almost a year to kind of come to that realization and then be more public about it. Yeah, I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's just an important example of like, just because people are doing stuff doesn't mean it's working. Just because
Yeah.
people are, you know, tooting their horn about it doesn't mean it's actually being successful. I feel like there's a similar kind of story of like big expansion around like vibe coding and everybody can build everything, and
Yeah.
then they realize that's like prototype grade, supporting it in production is hard, integrations are hard, and then people have kind of walked that back into like spaghetti code and then being more realistic about what's possible. So you just gotta be doubtful of your LinkedIn feed, especially when it gets to be a little bit too optimistic. The technology is strong, but it's strong in certain domains. It has to be tight feedback, and customer service success, stuff like that can be repetitive in points, but it can also be very open-ended in areas elsewhere. So I'm glad that there's a public discourse around, just because sometimes it looks like it's successful doesn't mean it will be successful long term, and we have to be careful about how we use it.
Certainly. And we get the chance to work directly with executives who are making these types of workforce decisions and thinking about the strategic future of the company with the rise of agents and Gen AI. So what I'm about to say is supported by what other enterprises are doing. Don't be like Klarna if you are in a position of deciding what workforce changes look like. It's a much better move to evolve with the technology, let natural attrition happen, and to constantly look at the workflows that people are doing in their work. So anytime you look at evaluating the next new hire or a gap in your team, if somebody attrits, like look at what could be supplemented by the latest tools that are coming out. Because as we know, and as we discuss on every podcast episode, there's a slew of new Gen AI solutions that are coming to market that are available. So continue to look at, as people change, as roles shift, look at how you can supplement, as opposed to being kind of ham-fisted like this Klarna guy, which is just like rip a bunch of people out and then try and replace it immediately and expect nothing bad to happen.
And look, I'm all about like experimentation and things like that, but clearly they didn't prove it out at a micro level before they did a pretty drastic rip and replace like you're talking about. Just to put some numbers behind this in terms of their losses, they've risen 17% year on year to 136 million. But a lot of that they're saying is attributed to widespread spread economic uncertainty, which understandable because on the consumer spend side, that makes sense. It's going to be directly correlated to that from a macro perspective. So again, I'm not attributing any or all of that to this AI snafu, but there's probably some of it. I mean, think about that, in terms of impact analysis. If you're having a terrible customer experience, there are other options other than Klarna in terms of financing for things. So, it's
let alone the internal company culture impact of that move as well.
Yeah.
It's
got to sting.
Yeah. Avoid that if you can, if you're in a position of making these types of decisions.
For sure.
Cool. What else is in the news?
Yeah, we've got, I guess, on a more timely note, we've got Trump's big, beautiful bill, right? And why does this matter? So we were actually just doing a governance training last week with one of our customers, and the news had just broken that included in this bill was basically a couple of things. So first and foremost, the bill was introducing an allocation of $500 million over the next 10 years to modernize government systems with the help of AI and automation technology. So that's a big plus. That's great. The second part of this bill, when it comes to AI, is putting a ban on additional AI regulation in addition to making local laws or state level laws or regulations around AI non-enforceable. So we've covered on this podcast the law in Colorado. I don't know if we covered the law in California, but there are several state level AI regulations and laws that have been enacted and can be enforced. And so the bill, if it passes, which of course it has not passed yet fully, if it does pass, would basically make those unenforceable. So there, obviously, with this administration, there's been a huge push to try to deregulate the ecosystem and make it a little bit easier for innovation and less challenging for us to be able to stop innovation in certain ways, although there are still several concerns that are not being addressed. And I think, I'm not one for over-regulation and overdoing the system with law, but there's still consumer protections that need to be in place. And I think AI is introducing a whole new level of consumer protections that need to be there. And I think that is still important. And I understand a lot of current laws will cover that. I've got another news article we can talk about too around Workday, which is a great example of that. But any thoughts on the regulatory environment right now in the US for AI?
I know, I think it's particularly interesting, just the balance between state level and then federal level regulations there too. It certainly makes it difficult for obviously enterprises who are operating across states. I'm even thinking about insurance carriers who are operating with different offices across different states. The regulatory pressure state by state within there, but then also the federal level on top. I personally think the move does not change for a lot of the folks who are working on AI initiatives inside of your organization. Additional regulations are going to come out, but you need to continue to focus on leaning into what provides most value to our workflows here. I don't know. I think it's a lot of noise. We'll see what actually comes into fruition related to what people have to actually adhere to. Similar to like the EU AI Act took quite a while to actually get enacted and for folks to follow within there.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to avoid proliferation of different state level ones, but I feel like there needed to be a federal one on top of it then, even if it was super light, to do some form of what those state level did. And then, I think it's interesting to see what is pushed down to the state level and what is not pushed down to the state level. But I do think that even if we stop the proliferation at the state level, there should be a federal level something in place. Doesn't need to be as much as the EU Act or other ones, but just something to kind of protect that. I'm also curious too, like what it changes around the data level kind of controls that are happening there, and like how do you separate the two? Like when does something move between the regulatory surface? But I'm gonna learn more about that and dive deeper into it to see how that affects it.
We'll certainly be at the cusp of those conversations with the folks that we work with, just as we think through like what does the tangible audit look like from an internal standpoint or external folks coming in to actually look at the requirements from a documentation standpoint, a workflow standpoint as well too. So we'll certainly share more as this stuff actually comes into practice inside a lot of these American enterprises. But it's a step, right? It's a first, finally, federal thing that's a step in the right direction, just towards organizing a lot of the states. And I know that when it's left to the states, there's a lot of confusion amongst the enterprises that operate across those. So we'll see how it works together.
Yeah, I'm personally a big advocate of state level. I mean, that's literally how we were supposed to be set up.
Yeah.
Right? Is to let states make decisions at a certain level, and then, when necessary, be able to have some sort of federal oversight on particular laws. However, the complexity is not necessarily, I mean, in some cases, the complexity does slow people down. For example, just the fact that there are so many different conditions and considerations per the use case and per data sets that are being used within a company, you end up having to do this complex routing situation where, like, every request that comes in on the use case side or on the solution side, we're having to ask a series of questions so that we can get dynamic responses on whether or not we're dealing with people in Colorado or people in California. And so, like, if it is, then we trigger all these other things that need to be done. So it does slow things down from that perspective, for sure. Yeah, but I don't know. I'm kind of torn in general on whether or not state or federal is the right move there. I know a lot of people have very strong opinions on the EU AI Act, but one of the things I keep emphasizing is, like, they really, really call out. There's two pieces of it. On the one side, they really call out, these really edge case use cases that not many companies are touching. So we're talking about citizenship and basic human rights, which most companies don't build systems for. So, like, it's not even applicable. Some of that's not even applicable to many companies. So there's one side of it. And the other side of it is just, general consumer protections, which they did with GDPR as well, which can be really tough to implement. But, like, maybe let's switch over to an example on the Workday side, and then let's get to some questions.
Yeah, I did have one final thought there too. I think, like, the regulatory environment will continue to change drastically, especially over the next 5 years, let alone next 10. So a lot of teams we work with practically, because, like, how do we deal with governance? How do we deal with the legal stuff? It's like, hey, let's put the processes in place so that we have the ability to, like, do what we say and say what we do, right? So, like, if our legal team says, like, hey, we now need to avoid these types of use cases, we need to have the controls in place to say, like, oh, no more new ones coming in, and then everything that's there, let's revisit those things, right? So I think a lot of companies we work with are still getting that foundational piece in place, and that's really the important part to focus on is, like, ISO, NIST, and then as this regulatory stuff kind of evolves around there, that you at least have, like, that anchoring mechanism in your business to continually align to not only the regulatory side, but also just, like, values inside of the company or different changing perspectives from leadership on how to use AI. So I think that's always the most important piece, is just get the process in place so that it can be flexible based on how things evolve and change with the technology and regulatory environment, for sure.
That reminds me of that estimate of, like, typically regulation has a 7-year lag time to innovation. And us being in this for 5 years almost at this point, like, just finally seeing at the federal level some regulation catch up related to a lot of things that teams were working on 5, 7, 10 years ago as well too.
Yeah, I mean, this federal regulation, though, is actually revoking regulation. So it's not actually introducing anything. It's taking state level regulation away.
I think Brennan's point stands, though, which is, like, the groundwork we know will still be relevant. It's the workflow, it's the document, it's, like, laying stuff out in a consistent manner so you can manage it better. Oh, and by the way, it helps with whatever you'll be required to do from an audit in the future from a regulatory standpoint.
Yeah, if this passes, then teams can go ahead and delete all of the conditions around the state level regulations they were considering before. And who knows, maybe it'll get reenacted. Real quick on Workday. So there was a collective action. There's a lawsuit against Workday basically for AI bias, which I know we talked about before in terms of people who are applying to jobs. Several folks over the age of 40 have claimed that there's age discrimination happening in the AI system that they're using in order for them to move forward in terms of applications for jobs. So there's a whole lawsuit against Workday. This judge, Rita Lynn, granted the applicant's request for a preliminary certification of a collective action on the age discrimination claim. Because applicants are alike in the central way that matters, they were allegedly required to compete on unequal footing due to Workday's discriminatory AI recommendations. They said that this actually has impacted, they're saying, millions of people, which is pretty wild. It's the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. So this was an example of an existing law, not a new AI regulation or AI law that is being enacted, but an existing law saying that you can't discriminate against people based on age. There's other protected classes as well, not in this act, but this one specifically calling out age in an employment act. Very interesting. Workday did come out and say, basically, in the court, that evidence will show that that is not the case. So they're going to have to be able to prove in court that there is no bias detected in the algorithm that was used at the time. And when we talk about like lineage and governance, they're going to have to go back and find the version of the model that was run every single time that one of these applicants in this collective was actually denied a job, and then prove that there was no bias in that process. So imagine if you had released 10 to 15 different versions of this model over the last couple of years, and you've got millions of people that you need to go back and look at all the individual records of that being processed from the model, and then be able to run a retroactive bias detection to prove that age was not a factor. This is the type of thing that I think people underestimate when they're starting to roll this stuff out. If you get in trouble and there's even a slight inclination that there's an issue, you need to be able to defend yourself. And if you don't have the stuff set up properly, good luck, right? I mean, this is no good.
Yeah, I think there's also, when I hear clients and customers bring up a lot of HR use cases that involve people, I'm like, is there something else we can work on first? Or instead, like, is there, you really have to have it's very easy to underestimate how making predictions about people has so many ethical and, future considerations, so much total cost of ownership, so many risks inherent to it. Have to be very, very, very mindful about how we do that. There's definitely can be ROI there, but that there's a very hidden, governance, ethical alignment piece that comes with those use cases. So I think it's also interesting too to see Workday as the vendor kind of taking the hit there, not the hirers that were using it too. So I think that's also might set a precedent as well that everybody building AI solutions needs to be cognizant of too. So I think there's a lot of good learnings in this one. I'm also really curious to see the evidence to how they disprove. I think that will be interesting as well. That could also help set precedents around monitoring and the statistical side of showing like bias and things like that. So it'll be interesting.
On the ground, am noticing a strategic direction change of leaders now as they're understanding more about the ethical and legal implications of artificial intelligence and learning from stories like this. They're consciously saying, let's hold the majority of our efforts in the HR space for now. There's a lot better spaces to explore this in where we could have more fruitful ROI, but also just a cleaner change. And as we're doing initial proof of concept for this stuff, we don't want it to be egg on our face this early on.
Well, I think you brought up another really great point that I like to talk about with customers, Brendan, is that where's the liability sit? And so to your point, the vendor is being held liable in this case. But we often hear and talk about and read about local law, New York Local Law 144, which puts the onus of bias detection on automated employment decisions on the customer or the individual or the company that is actually hiring. So even if you do use Workday's AI system, it would hold Workday not liable for the outcome. It would hold the actual company leveraging the Workday system liable because they are responsible for an independent audit. So if you read through that legislation, you'll be able to see where the liability sits at the legal level. There's also the complexity within the contracts itself. So if you read through the contract agreement between Workday and its customers, there's probably a pretty brutal negotiation process to push as much liability of outcomes onto the customer as possible. That's why, to your point, Brendan, I'm also kind of shocked by that, but we'll see.
Yeah. All right. Now getting into the Q&A section. These are some of our favorite episodes because we actually get to respond to some questions that our listeners have and that we hear in direct conversations that we're having with a lot of these decision makers on AI inside of these enterprises. Mm-hmm. Please, we encourage listeners, send us more questions. We're going to get to as many as we have time for today, but if there's additional ones, send them to us, right? Drop them on our LinkedIn, on our website, whatever. First one, kind of timely, just riffing on the topic that we were just talking about. So many enterprises and so many conference talks are focused on agentic AI. One of the conceptual questions that comes up as folks think ahead to agents and managing agents inside of their organization are, how should we, as companies, as hiring managers, train and supervise AI agents like we do employees? Should we treat them like employees conceptually? And then as kind of a fun follow-up to that, should these AI systems or agents need licenses to operate in regulated sectors like humans do for pilots and doctors and things like that too?
That's interesting.
So first question, how should we think about training and supervising AI agents like we do employees, or should we not think about them as employees? What are your guys' thoughts on that?
I like the parallel of it. I think where people get it wrong is they think about agents and the tasks in the scope of an agent as a one-to-one to a human.
Yeah.
Actually, I'll call out Sadie St. Lawrence because she does a really great job articulating this because she studies kind of work and how work is broken down and that interface with machines and AI. And one of the things that she has said is a person's job is made up of a load of tasks and a load of requirements and responsibilities. AI systems rarely can do all the things that one human can do, even a cluster of them that's orchestrated by another agent, maybe. And so I think we think about that as a one-to-one, which is often wrong. And we do an absolute terrible job breaking down people's work structures and responsibilities in general.
Yep.
And so that's part of the problem. It's like, if you're going to be onboarding it, the level of specificity you have to give to these systems today, because, the autonomy actually is not quite there yet, is quite a lot. And that's a problem, and that's really challenging. So I like the idea of it, but I think in practice, it's not one-to-one. I don't know. Brendan, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a useful metaphor. But if we subscribe too much to them, like to the agentic solutions or the AI solutions overall, I think it can lead to a lot of traps and misunderstandings. I think they still are tools, like they're very elaborate, very fancy, very powerful tools, but they should still be designed and used and leveraged in a very human in the loop or tightly coupled to an individual inside of the enterprise, in my opinion. I think those guardrails will get bigger and bigger where they can do more and more things autonomously, but we still live in a point where we should keep it pretty heavy oversight in the tasks. It should be more of a co-pilot solution, even if it is agentic, like working alongside me to accomplish something, because that will also help improve the agentic solution and make it better and make it stronger. So I still very highly believe in the tightly coupled human in the loop paradigm, which should keep us from giving too much accountability or responsibility to the agent. But I do think it's useful to think about, when we're designing work going forward, what is the role AI can do in these jobs and these roles? And then how do we design our teams, design our organization around those kind of opportunities? I think we're also seeing a massive offset already in the labor market, especially with entry-level roles, and information work has dropped very significantly. So I do believe that we are seeing the displacement of work to AI systems or elsewhere. So I do think like now is the time for this conversation of like, what does work look like alongside AI? But I still believe we should not over personify or anthropomorphize, I think is the fancy way to say it. I don't know how to pronounce that, but yeah, that word for like, don't make them too human in your brain, right? Because they still are AI systems or machines, right?
And I think that highlights the gap. And I think that the tension that a lot of these enterprise leaders feel, which is we're hearing AI in the news say autonomy is the goal. Like OpenAI is saying autonomy is the goal. We're only a few years away from AGI. But then the reality is like, I'm planning for AI and how we use AI at work. It should still come back to, we say with the word workflows a lot, but like, what are we accomplishing? And this kind of helps answer that second question to this, which was like, do the AI systems and agents need licenses to operate in regulated sectors? I would say no, because I don't think there's a reality where they fully encompass something that needs to be fully regulated.
I think it depends. If you're expecting this AI system to fully cover, because think of the word agent. It comes from agency, meaning it's able to act. So you're giving the system agency to take action. That action might be searching something. It might be, executing on a transaction. It might be writing to a database, right? You're giving it agency. That's part of the core portion of this agent part. So I think it depends on the action. So if the action is associated with something that has an impact, I don't know that the AI system obviously can be held liable for that. Again, there's probably a human in the loop component that still needs to be factored in, especially for something that has to be certified or is highly regulated. But I do think that there's probably a quality control element to certification that's important to that extent, right? Like we, as humans, go through training, we get certified on topics, we get tested. That certification carries weight in some places, doesn't carry weight in other places, depending on the rigor of the certification. And I think that also somewhat holds true in terms of performance capabilities of these systems, and and your performance to execute against that over time, improving that. So I think it depends. I think that's kind of a nuanced question.
Yeah, I would say like whatever FAA and like aviation folks do with autopilots, like let's do that. Like
Yeah.
whatever I feel like they do a great job. There's really
Mhm.
not too many plane crashes. Like there's pretty tight controls around how you fly an airplane, and then however they certify the autopilot's like ready. I feel like that might be a good starting point to then extrapolate out, because I don't think the autopilot gets like a pilot's license, but whatever they QC that, I feel like that might be a good base point to work from.
Although there has been a lot more hesitancy in the FAA recently. I actually had a pilot who came out on the plane, literally came out to talk about the different controls on landing in San Francisco, and like the fact that they have to land so close to other planes. And he said, like, due to the level of general sentiment towards the FAA, I'm just giving you all reassurance that it's okay, and like, don't panic. Like, he literally said that before we left. It was kind of bizarre.
Yeah, I'd say autopilot's not air traffic controls. Let's focus. Let's separate those two, because I think there's different.
True.
It reminds me of a great book. It's called The Science of Fear by Daniel Gardner. Basically, with the news and what's happening, the human reaction to what we're afraid of and what we're using AI for definitely sways with that too. That's all the time we have for questions for today. Thank you guys so much for listening. This was our episode 24 of AI or Die. Please continue to send in your questions or topics that you'd like us to talk about. As always, reach out, check us out wherever you listen to podcasts. You can go to getalignai.com or Spotify or Apple Music as well. Thank you for listening, and we will see you on the next one. Thanks, everybody.